He had no name, no home, just bruises, silence, and a loaf of bread clutched in his frozen hands. But one man stopped, and that moment changed everything. This is not a rescue story. It's a story of choosing love every single day, no matter how broken the beginning. Stay with us, because what happens next will stay in your heart forever. The boy did not cry. Not when the cold bit his toes like wolves beneath the snow. Not when his ribs burned from the steel-toed boot that had sent him flying. And certainly not when the crowd passed him by, stepping over his crumpled body as if he were nothing more than wind-blown trash. He had no name, at least not one anyone had cared to ask. For the people of Durango, he was just one more half-starved orphan scurrying about for scraps, too stubborn to die and too invisible to save. 9 years old, maybe 10, thin as fence wire, wrapped in a patchwork of rags that had once been a curtain, feet bare, eyes the color of pale sky, but filled with the kind of winter that no season could melt. It was mid-December, the kind of bitter cold that froze water in the troughs before dawn. Durango's streets were a mess of ice and ash, the sky dull with snow that hadn't yet made up its mind whether to fall or not. Men drank harder this time of year, and mercy was even scarcer than firewood. The boy had seen a half loaf of bread tossed near the saloon steps, a careless discard from a patron too drunk to care. He'd reached for it, that's all, just reached. Then came the boot. Waylon Griggs, mean as he was drunk, took offense at something. Maybe the boy's existence. Maybe the way his fingers dared to touch what Waylon hadn't finished. Maybe it was just Tuesday. The kick lifted the boy off his feet. He landed hard, a wet thud in the frozen mud. Blood spilled fast from his nose, turning the slush beneath him a shocking red. But still, he did not cry. Folks glanced. Nobody helped. One woman turned away and crossed herself. A man at the blacksmith's watched, then went back to hammering. These weren't bad people, they'd say, just busy, just cold, just tired. Then a shadow moved. The sound was the first thing that caught attention. Spurs, not jangling, just steady, slow, sure. A tall figure stepped from the alley beside the saloon. A wide-brimmed hat covered most of his face, and the long oilskin coat he wore whispered with each step like dry grass in the wind. Silas Hayes didn't say a word at first. He simply looked. At the boy, curled around a piece of bread like it was gold. At Waylon, standing over him, swaying slightly, breath reeking of whiskey. "Pick it up," Silas said, voice low and even. Waylon blinked. "What did you say?" "Pick up the bread, give it back." "Hell I will," Waylon muttered, puffing out his chest. "You ain't law, Hayes." "No," Silas said. "I ain't, but you don't need a badge to know what's right." Waylon lunged. Silas moved. The punch was fast, too fast for a man his size. One fist to the jaw, and Waylon dropped like a sack of rotten grain. The town fell silent. The piano inside the saloon paused. Even the wind seemed to hush. Silas stepped over Waylon and knelt. His coat brushed the mud. The boy flinched, shoulders tightening like a trap about to snap. Silas didn't touch him, just knelt beside him and said, "That bread still good?" The boy looked at him. Really looked. Silas saw it then, that fine line between trust and survival. He saw a boy who'd learned too early that hands were made for hurting. A boy who hadn't been held in years. "I got a fire," Silas said, "and soup, ain't much, but it's hot." The boy didn't speak, but slowly, carefully, he reached out and took Silas's gloved hand. Silas rose, lifting the boy gently as if he were made of glass. He wrapped his coat tighter around the child, picked up the half loaf of bread, and turned toward the edge of town. No one followed, no one stopped them. But from the saloon porch, old Miss Adeline whispered to herself, "That man just changed a life today." She didn't know the half of it. They reached Red Mesa Ranch as the sun dipped behind the mountains, setting the snow-covered hills aglow in hues of rose and lavender. The horse's hooves slowed as the weight of the boy shifted in Silas's arms, light as a scarecrow and just as hollow. The wind whispered through the cottonwoods and rattled the loose boards of the barn, but Silas didn't flinch. He'd weathered storms before, outside and in. Inside the ranch house, warmth fought back the cold with a cast-iron stove and the smell of wood smoke. Silas laid the boy on a padded bench near the hearth. The child didn't speak, didn't even open his eyes. His fingers clung to the bread like it might disappear. Silas stirred the stew pot, ladled out a bowl, and set it beside the boy. Then he said nothing and let the fire do its work. The house was quiet that first night, save for the pop of the stove and the hiss of wind across the eaves. Silas watched the boy from his chair, every breath the child took like a whisper of hope in the stillness. He didn't ask who the boy was or where he'd come from. He just watched and waited. Come morning, the boy was gone. Not far, just under the kitchen table, curled tight with his back to the wall. Silas left breakfast where he could reach it. By noon, the bowl was empty. For days, they moved around each other like ghosts. Silas mended fences. The boy watched from the porch. Silas brushed the horses. The boy stood in the doorway, always watching, always silent. On the 5th day, Silas came in from the barn to find kindling stacked near the stove. It wasn't much, crooked and splintered, but it was effort. It was something. That night, the boy sat at the table, ate without speaking, then returned to his spot near the hearth, closer this time. A week later, his voice broke the quiet. "My name's Noah." Silas paused mid-stir, looked over, nodded once. "Good to know, Noah." That was it. Nothing more was needed. In the weeks that followed, Silas gave him chores. Easy at first, feeding chickens, carrying water. Noah did them without complaint. He worked hard, too hard for a child. But Silas didn't stop him. He knew work had a way of stitching broken things back together. One night after supper, Silas told him about Lydia, his late wife, and Caleb, their son. He didn't sugarcoat the grief, just laid it out like firewood and let it crackle between them. Noah didn't respond, but he didn't look away either. Then, one morning, Silas found Noah in the barn, cradling a newborn goat. The animal had been rejected by its mother, and the boy had wrapped it in his coat. Silas watched him for a long time before stepping forward. "You got a soft heart," he said. Noah didn't answer, but he smiled. That smile was the first sign that something inside him was healing. Winter began to lift its grip on the valley. Snow turned to slush, and the creeks began to babble again. Noah's eyes followed birds instead of shadows. His shoulders no longer curled inward like he was bracing for a blow. He slept in a bed now, not under the table. One afternoon, Silas brought out a worn book, Caleb's old reader, and set it on the table. Noah opened it slowly, ran a finger along the letters like they were spells. "You know how?" Silas asked. "A little," Noah whispered. Silas nodded. "We'll start again, together." That evening, the wind howled against the windows, but inside they sat side by side, an old rancher and a quiet boy, sounding out words by lantern light. It was slow, but it was steady, like fence posts driven deep and true. That night, Noah woke from a dream, eyes wide and wild. Silas found him by the stove, knees drawn to his chest. "I was back there," he said. "He was yelling. I couldn't move." Silas didn't try to explain it away. He just sat down and said, Sometimes the past knocks real loud, but it don't mean you gotta open the door. Noah didn't answer, but he leaned against Silas's shoulder, and that was answer enough. They didn't talk about family. Didn't need to. Family wasn't something either of them spoke of lightly anymore. But it was growing between them, unspoken and stubborn as spring. By the end of that month, folks in Durango began to notice the boy beside Silas. A few asked questions. Silas gave quiet answers. But Noah never left his side. In a world that had taught him not to trust, not to hope, not to love, Noah was learning all three, not with grand gestures but with small ones: a mended fence, a brushed horse, a loaf of bread shared without fear. Trust was slow, but it was coming, brick by brick, breath by breath. And by the time the first daffodil bloomed outside the kitchen window, Red Mesa Ranch wasn't just a place to stay. It was home. Some storms don't rumble in with thunder or lightning. Some creep back on familiar boots, their danger hidden beneath smooth words and old smiles. And when they come for what you've built, quietly, persistently, they bring more than just memory. They bring reckoning. It was late March when the trouble showed up at Red Mesa Ranch, the kind of trouble you feel before you see it. Snow had started to recede, leaving behind soft mud and secrets frozen too long in the ground. Silas and Noah were working the southern pasture, tightening a loose stretch of fencing, when Silas noticed a rider at the far end of the trail. Slow-moving. No hurry in him. That alone put Silas on edge. The rider wore a long coat dusted with road grime, a wide-brimmed hat tilted to block the sun. He didn't wave, didn't nod, just waited until Silas rode over and dismounted. "You Silas Hayes?" "That's right." "Name's Samuel Griggs." Silas didn't blink. He recognized the name immediately, Waylon's brother. "I'm listening. Heard you picked up a boy a few months back. Street rat in Durango, might be kin." "He's not a rat," Silas said, voice hardening. "And he's not yours." Samuel smiled, slow and crooked. "You don't get to decide that. Blood's blood." "Number." "Blood's what he lost on a muddy street while your brother kicked him half to death." Samuel didn't answer that, just turned his horse and rode off, leaving silence heavier than a blizzard. That night, Noah sat by the fire without speaking. Silas watched him, knowing the questions forming in the boy's mind had no easy answers. Finally, Noah said, "That man, he's his brother, ain't he?" Silas nodded. "Samuel Griggs, trouble." Noah's fingers curled tighter around the edge of the blanket. "What's he want?" "Control. Maybe pride, maybe just to stir pain." "Will he come back?" Silas looked into the fire, his jaw tight. "Yes, and next time, he won't come alone." They doubled the locks on the doors that night. Silas moved a rifle closer to his bed. The piece they had so carefully built now felt thinner, like a window pane against a coming storm. 2 weeks passed with no sign. Noah started sleeping more soundly again, though he still jumped at loud knocks. Then, one bright afternoon, another man rode up the long hill to Red Mesa. This one, cleaner cut, his hands trembling slightly even as he dismounted. He introduced himself as Elias Carter. "I'm looking for a boy, my nephew maybe." His mother was Mary Carter Silas, studied the man for a long time before speaking. "You're her brother?" Elias nodded, eyes wet. "I've been searching for her for years. She left with a man named Griggs. Word is, he came back alone, and her boy, Jacob, I think, might be here." Silas took a breath, then motioned to the porch. "Wait here." Inside, Noah stood frozen when Silas told him. "He says he's your uncle, Mary Carter's brother." Noah didn't answer at first, Then he nodded. "Let's see him." The meeting was tense. Elias sat stiff in a wooden chair, his hat twisting in his hands. Noah stood near the stove, silent as a tomb. "I don't want to upset anything," Elias said. "I just needed to see you." "You never came before," Noah said, not accusing, just stating a fact. "I didn't know where to find you. I thought she'd come back. When she didn't, I feared the worst. Then I heard what happened." Elias's voice broke. He covered his mouth with his hand. Silas watched from the corner, ready to step in. But Noah didn't move. Finally, he said, "Why now?" "I wanted to make it right. I know I can't fix it, but I want to try. You can come with me. I've got a home in Montrose. Steady job with the rail. I could give you schooling, a real bed." "I have a bed," Noah interrupted. The room went quiet. Silas met Elias's eyes. "He's not under lock and key. He makes his own choices here." Noah looked from one man to the other, then back to Silas. "Do I have to go?" "No," Silas said. "Not unless you want to." Noah shook his head. "I want to stay." Elias let out a long breath. He stood slowly and extended his hand, not toward Noah, but toward Silas. "You've done right by him, I can see that." "Thank you." Silas nodded and took the man's hand. As Elias rode away, Noah stepped outside to watch. He stood there a long time, even after the dust had settled. That night, he said, "He seemed like he meant it." "He did," Silas replied. "But meaning well doesn't always come at the right time." A new quiet settled over the ranch, not fearful, not sad, just watchful, because they both knew Samuel Griggs hadn't made his last visit, and when the past returned, it rarely came alone. Some truths don't knock on your door. They don't arrive with a warning or wait for a proper time. They come wrapped in envelopes bearing courthouse stamps, telling you what you already feared, that the past wasn't done with you yet. When the letter from Montrose County Courthouse arrived, Silas Hayes didn't need to read it twice. He knew what it meant. Samuel Griggs wanted custody of Noah, and the battleground would be a courtroom. The days before the hearing were the longest Silas had known in years. Not because he feared the law, but because he feared the law wouldn't see the truth. Not the kind carved into court documents, but the truth that lived in Noah's eyes when he slept soundly by the fireplace. That kind of truth had no paper trail. Silas barely slept, poring over old letters, asking Miriam about child welfare rules, writing down everything he'd come to know about the boy who had, in a few months, become as much a part of him as breath. Meanwhile, Noah tried to act like everything was fine, but Silas noticed he wasn't singing anymore when feeding the chickens. He wasn't asking for a second helping of stew. The weight was there, pressing down on both of them. When the morning came, Silas took extra care in dressing. He wore the shirt Lydia had once said made him look almost dashing, and Noah tugged uncomfortably at a jacket Miriam had sewn buttons onto just the night before. In the mirror, they looked like a pair of strangers trying to pass as something more. But the bond between them was no performance. The courthouse in Montrose was imposing, all red brick and echoing hallways. The cold inside was different than the wind outside. It was the kind that came from judgment. They waited outside the courtroom, knees bouncing, hands tightening around each other when the doors opened and their names were called. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversation until the judge entered. Judge Howard Morrison was a seasoned man, his hair gone white and his eyes quick. He looked at them all the way a doctor might glance over an X-ray, seeking the damage beneath the surface. Samuel's lawyer was the first to speak. He paced slowly, delivering a well-rehearsed performance about family legacy, blood ties, the rights of next of kin. He called Silas a man of kind intentions but limited means. He said Noah needed stability, access to education, discipline. Then it was Silas's turn. He stood slowly, not because he lacked strength, but because the burden he carried wasn't one he could just unload in 10 minutes. He looked at the judge, then at Noah, then back again. "I never set out to raise a child," he began, his voice low. "But I found one freezing on the street, holding a piece of bread like it was the last treasure in the world. I didn't know his name, he didn't know mine. What I did know was that he was hurt, and nobody else was stepping in." He paused, letting the words settle. "He didn't trust me at first. Why would he? The world hadn't given him a reason to trust anyone, but I didn't ask him for anything. I just gave him food, a warm fire, space, and in time, he gave something back, his trust, then his laughter, and eventually something I never expected, a reason to believe I could be a father again." Silas's voice broke slightly. He looked down, steadied himself, then continued. "I've buried a child. My boy, Caleb, lost him to fever when he was not much older than Noah is now. I thought I'd lost my chance at fatherhood, but this boy showed up in my life and gave it back. I didn't earn it, I just didn't let go of it." He stepped back, letting silence speak for him. The courtroom didn't move. Then Judge Morrison asked the most important question. "Noah, would you like to speak?" Noah stood slowly, buttoning his jacket like armor. He looked around the room, then fixed his gaze on the judge. "When I lived on the street, nobody saw me. People stepped over me like I was garbage. Mr. Hayes saw me. He didn't ask who I was, he just helped." He turned to Samuel. "You say, 'I'm your blood,' but you didn't come when I was hungry. You didn't come when I was cold, Mr. Hayes did." Finally, he looked back at the judge. "He's not my blood, but he's my home, and that means more." Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. He took a long moment before speaking. "In my years, on this bench, I've learned that blood might start a family, but it doesn't sustain one. Love, presence, sacrifice, those are the things that define parenthood. Mr. Hayes, you've demonstrated all of them. Custody is awarded to you." The gavel came down like thunder, but in that moment the courtroom felt weightless. Outside, the clouds broke open and sunlight spilled over Montrose like a quiet blessing. On the ride home, Noah didn't say much. He stared out at the horizon until Red Mesa came into view. Then, softly, he asked, "Can I call you Dad now?" Silas, who had been waiting for those words without even knowing it, nodded with a quiet smile. "You always could, son." The sky above Red Mesa Ranch stretched endlessly, painted with hues of lavender and gold, as if the heavens themselves were tipping their hat to the story unfolding below. It had been a month since the courtroom doors closed behind them, a month since Noah had stood tall and spoken truth to power, a month since Silas Hayes had walked out not as a guardian by circumstance, but as a father by choice. The days that followed were slow, steady, and sacred. Noah had begun to rise with the sun, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. There was something new in his stride, a stillness inside that had been carved from chaos but now held the roots of belonging. He laughed more, not the hesitant kind that waited to be silenced, but deep belly laughs that rolled out during dinner or when a rooster tried to crow with a broken voice. Silas noticed every change, though he didn't always say so. He didn't need to, he just watched. Watched as Noah outgrew the boots they'd bought back in January. Watched as the boy took to teaching the younger children who had since found their way to the ranch, showing them how to grip a shovel or cradle a chick. Silas stood quietly at the edge of those moments. The corners of his eyes creased with quiet pride. Noah had become more than just a part of the ranch. He had become its heartbeat. And it wasn't just Noah. Miriam's steady presence grew into something greater, too. Her kindness was no longer a guest in the house. It lived there now. She brought color to the windows with curtains stitched by hand and stories from her girlhood told beside the fire. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke, it was always something you remembered. It was Miriam who first suggested inviting others. Children like Noah, lost in a world that had no place for them. At first, Silas hesitated. He had poured so much into saving one boy, and now he was being asked to open the gates again? But Miriam had gently placed her hand over his and said, "You're not just saving him anymore. You're showing others how to choose love, too." So they did, quietly, no announcements, no fanfare, just open arms and warm meals. Word spread on whisper and wind. By summer's end, 5 more children had found their way to Red Mesa. Each brought their own storm. One girl hadn't spoken in 3 weeks. One boy flinched every time someone raised a voice. But Silas knew this terrain now. He walked it slowly. He didn't try to fix them. He just let them be. And they healed in their own time. There were chores, of course. No one lived at the ranch without pulling their weight. But there was also space for joy. Music drifted from the barn on Saturdays. Storytelling under stars became a tradition. Birthdays were celebrated whether remembered or not. Miriam baked pies for no reason, and the children swore they were magic. One morning, Silas found Noah building a small bookshelf with scrap wood. When asked what it was for, the boy answered, "For the ones coming after me. So they'll know someone thought they were worth more than a bed and a plate." Then came the wedding. It wasn't something grand. Just a warm September evening under a canopy of cottonwoods, with the children seated in mismatched chairs, and a preacher from Durango reading a short verse. Silas and Miriam stood hand in hand, not because they needed a witness, but because they already had 6. Noah was Silas's best man, holding the ring with trembling hands and eyes wet with something unspoken. Afterward, they feasted in the yard, cornbread, stew, sweet tea, and laughter. The children danced until the stars came out, and when the fire grew low, they each took turns saying what Red Mesa meant to them. One said, "Safety." Another whispered, "Belonging." And the youngest, a 5-year-old girl with curls wild as wind, said, "Home." That night, Silas sat on the porch, Noah beside him as always. The boy's legs had grown longer, his shoulders more square, but he still leaned slightly against Silas like he had on the first ride home. "Do you think this will last?" Noah asked. Silas looked up at the sky, stars scattered like breadcrumbs from heaven. "Only if we keep choosing it." Noah nodded, then smiled. "Then I'll choose it every day." And Silas, with a heart full of the hardest kind of love, the kind you work for, said, "So will I." Red Mesa Ranch wasn't just a place anymore. It was a living thing. A patch of earth stitched together with pain and hope, with sorrow that learned how to sing. It didn't promise ease, but it promised presence. And in a world where so much could be taken, that promise was everything. This was no fairy tale ending. It was something better, a beginning, rebuilt on solid ground, forged by hands that had known both hurt and healing. Family, they discovered, wasn't found, it was built. Not by blood, but by belief. Not once, but every single day. It was made in laughter and sweat and mended fences and quiet forgiveness shared over bread. Years later, when folks asked Noah what saved him, he never said Silas's name. He said, "A place where someone saw me," and stayed. Red Mesa Ranch stood as testament to a truth too many forget. Love is not an accident. It's a vow we keep making, even when it's hard, even when it hurts. And in the keeping, we make something holy. Not just a home, a legacy. A home built by heart. Noah's journey from a nameless, beaten boy on the cold streets of Durango to a beacon of hope at Red Mesa Ranch is more than a tale of survival. It is a testament to what love, patience, and quiet presence can create. His story is stitched together not with grand heroics, but with the kind of small, unwavering acts that rebuild souls one brick at a time. It began with silence. A boy too hurt to cry, too forgotten to be noticed, too small to fight back. Left in a frozen gutter with blood on his face and bread clutched in his hand, he expected the world to keep walking. Until Silas Hayes stopped. Silas didn't offer pity. He didn't ask for a name or an explanation. He simply offered a warm fire, a bowl of stew, and a place to sit where the wind couldn't find him. And in doing so, he changed everything. The journey wasn't quick, it wasn't clean. Noah didn't instantly trust. He flinched, he ran. He watched from corners and disappeared beneath tables. But slowly, like dawn creeping through curtains, he began to believe. A stick of kindling left near the stove. A quiet seat at the table. A whispered name. Noah. What grew between Silas and Noah wasn't conventional. It wasn't planned. But it was real. Built through shared work, silent understanding, and a bond neither could name but both could feel. As the snow melted and the valley warmed, so did Noah. He smiled, he helped, he healed. Then the past returned, as it always does. First through Samuel Griggs with threats and blood claims. Then through Elias Carter, a man seeking redemption and family. Each arrival tested the fragile world Noah and Silas had built. Each threatened to undo the quiet miracle unfolding at Red Mesa. But Noah stood tall. In court, before a judge, he didn't recite laws or plead. He spoke truth, the kind carved not in documents but in daily choices. He chose Silas, chose home, chose the man who hadn't just saved him, but stayed. And the law listened. From that moment on, Red Mesa Ranch wasn't just land. It became legacy. Silas, Miriam, and Noah built something rare. Not a sanctuary from the world, but a shelter shaped by it. They opened their doors, not with signs or sermons, but with warm bread and a place to belong. Others came, broken, lost, quiet, and slowly they healed too. Noah became more than a survivor. He became a mentor, a teacher, a quiet leader who had known absence and now chose presence every day. He learned to read, to build, to guide, and in time he became the reason other children dared to believe in home again. Their story didn't end with a gavel or a wedding. It kept going, with each laugh around the fire, each birthday pie, each fence mended together. Red Mesa Ranch turned into something living, breathing, a legacy not written in blood, but in choice. So, what's the lesson we carry from this story? That family is not defined by blood or obligation, but by those who stay, by those who see you when the world looks away, by those who choose you over and over when it would be easier to walk. Noah wasn't rescued by luck. He was rescued by love, the steady, stubborn kind, the kind that shows up with soup and silence and says, "You don't have to be ready. You just have to be here." And Silas? He didn't heal by forgetting his pain. He healed by letting someone else in, by believing he could love again. Not the same way, but just as deeply, just as fiercely. In today's world, where so many still feel unseen, unheard, unchosen, this story is a map, a reminder that you don't need perfection to build family. You need presence. You need choice. You need to be willing to stay. You don't have to be a hero to change someone's life. You just have to notice, and then act. Noah's life changed because one man did both. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power in choosing love, in choosing to stay, in choosing to build something that lasts, Then help us keep these legends alive. Subscribe to Wild West Legends. Your support helps us tell more stories like Noah's, tales of quiet courage, of hope reborn, of love chosen in the dust and fire of the frontier. Because out here, in the Wild West of the heart, every name matters. Every home is sacred, and every story, no matter how small, deserves to be told. Thank you for riding with us. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and keep believing in the power of choosing love.